Welcome to SportsLit. I'm Neil Acharya.
And I am Nate Sager.
Before we start, I want to point out a correction from our last interview with Brian Burke, Season 4, Episode 5, where I incorrectly said that he played hockey for the University of Maine, when in fact it was Providence, and he later played for the Philadelphia Flyers affiliate in Maine, the Mariners.
Indeed, yeah, he jumped out of the Friars right into the Flyers farm team.
So, as for today, if you are Canadian, or if you are a hockey fan in general, you should have heard about Willie O'Ree by now. But what do you or I really know about the man other than in 1958 he became the first black player to play in an NHL game, and that he has been a diversity ambassador for the league for the past 22 years? Did you know that he traces his ancestry back to a man named Paris O'Ree, who his family believes fled South Carolina through an early version of the Underground Railroad and reached New Brunswick nearly 100 years before Confederation? Did you know he attended training camp with the Milwaukee Braves in Waycross, Georgia during the height of Jim Crow? Or that the man he is often mentioned in the same breath with in hockey circles, Jackie Robinson, is someone he actually met in his early teens in 1949, and he told the Pioneer that he would do for hockey what Jackie did for baseball. And then they would later meet again in 1962 at an NAACP luncheon where Robinson remembered the confident young man. "I met you in Brooklyn and you told me you were going to be a hockey player," he said to O'Ree. And so you did. These are some of the things you'll learn when you read Willie, O'Ree's autobiography released on October 20th with Michael McKinley. What is perhaps most profound is Mr. O'Ree's perspective, particularly the way in which he breaks down why Herb Carnegie, who didn't get the chance he did, how he was caught by an indirect, almost more hurtful type of discrimination, which is being given a shot, but not really a fair one. And he's also careful to include Larry Kwong, who, like Carnegie, faced an ice ceiling, if you will, but did actually get to play one shift. Did he get a fair shot? No, not really, he told Ken Reed in One Night Only. Quote from the book, "Let's say what Herb Carnegie and Larry Kwong experienced didn't go away when I made the NHL," he writes. After living in relative anonymity after retiring from pro hockey in 1979, O'Ree was approached by the NHL in 1996, and expanding the game was the mandate of the new regime. And so in Mr. O'Ree, they found someone who could champion inclusion and attract kids of different backgrounds to the fastest game on earth. 2 years later, he was hired as the Director of Youth Development and Ambassador for NHL Diversity. Now over to you, Nate.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Yeah, Willie O'Ree and Michael McKinley have crafted a memoir that shows that everyone, early in life, they need to hear about what they can do rather than what they cannot. Like, regardless of your life circumstances, what you were born into. I think that's what gives someone a fighting chance of believing in themselves. He states, he didn't really face people hating him for the color of his skin until he left Fredericton, New Brunswick in the mid-1950s to pursue his hockey dream. And that really segues into what I thought was a message of the book, which was leading people to some level of understanding, because, Willie O'Ree saw the the corrosive effects of racism and racial resentment. I mean, he was in the Jim Crow South, taking a shot at baseball. He was living in Los Angeles when the Watts Rebellion happened in 1965. I think the book does a good job of leading people, who are sheltered like me, to some level of understanding that racism often seems times to fit that sort of iceberg analogy. You had ice ceiling, I have iceberg. There's that 1/8 of it that's above the waterline. It's easy to see and dunk on over Facebook and Twitter. Oh, look, there's Karen, calling the cops on some guy doing lunges in the park again. But then there's the inevitable reminders that there's that other 7/8, that's below the surface. It's baked into the power structure of Western society. And O'Ree writes, as a young adult, he saw that there were two types of discrimination. Sometimes there's the wall that you're not getting through, but there's also these invisible lines that sometimes you dared not to cross. And he also said, as he went on in his career, oftentimes as the only black player in an entire league, not never mind his own team, he said there was a creeping kind of racism wherein he, quote, was not allowed to only play hockey. I know that even today, black NHLers are never just hockey players, and we have been seeing that close up in the last year or so with the activism from athletes, extending throughout every pro sport, in particular with hockey players such as Akeem Aliu, and then on to current NHLers like Matthew Dumba, Malcolm Subban, Ryan Reeves, Evander Kane, and Darnell Nurse, forming the Hockey Diversity Alliance and getting the team owners and the league to realize the hockey industry has a duty to assist with the Black Lives Matters movement. Now, like O'Ree, he's a guy who's soft-spoken, but the way he faced down, hatefulness at times by, through his, self-compassion and self-belief, I think that carries a big stick, to use the Teddy Roosevelt analogy. Call back to our Brian Burke episode last week. The book's narrative really prompts one to think about, who is it who gets the door held open for them, and who has to keep knocking at the door, and maybe even, kicking it in. The circumstances that kept his NHL stint to just 45 games were this sort of curious catch-22. O'Ree was blind in his right eye after being injured playing junior in 1956, which he kept secret for obvious reasons. And I think he sort of believes that that was why the Boston Bruins moved on from him quickly after 1 year, moved him to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, in those days, the Canadiens were regal hockey royalty, and the Bruins were sort of a perennial also ran. And the Bruins quickly flipped him to the Canadiens to get value in return rather than lose him for nothing. And the way it worked out was he didn't play another NHL game after that because Montreal moved him to Los Angeles in the Western Hockey League, which was a high-caliber minor league, which probably had more in common today with something like a league in Europe. Like it's not a farm system. It's its own thing. And it helped hockey grow in several cities, that are now NHL markets. But when the NHL finally expanded in 1967, guys who were in that league, they didn't get exposed to the expansion draft, and Willie ended up staying in the Western League right until the day it folded in 1974. So he never got that. We always talk about a second chance aside, but he never got that second chance as an NHL player, even though he was a goal-scoring champion in that, really good caliber minor pro league. And the NHL obviously needed a lot of new guys, and there were players in their 30s making their debuts after expansion. It was a different time, so we're not in a position to judge, and there's plausible hockey reasons for why things worked out the way they did. But 40 years after Willie O'Ree played in the NHL while concealing a huge visual limitation, Brian Berard, whom we had as guest in March, he made a comeback in the NHL after he was blinded in one eye. And I think he told us that he wouldn't have met the NHL's vision requirement, but at that time they realized it was better for hockey to show that someone could persevere and come back from that. Whereas in pro hockey in Willie O'Ree's time, they were just like, well, we don't know, we don't want to take that risk. Well, why didn't they? We don't know, but one has to wonder why the accommodation in one era, why not in another. What's also good about Willie, the book, we're going to call him Mr. O'Ree until we're told otherwise, that it also, I think, challenges some of the ways we, talk about, pioneering black sports people. For instance, with the Jackie Robinson story, it's often subtly implied that, once the initial resistance to integration frayed, progress just moved in a straight line. And I think it's often, couched in terms of American exceptionalism and progress. Like, look how, astute we are that we realized. But, Jackie Robinson was a complex man, and he had lots of conflict. He was someone who said, I cannot stand and sing the anthem. I cannot salute the flag. I know that I am a black man in a white world. And I saw that quote the other night on Twitter, Sports by Brooks, and he's like, who said this, Jackie Robinson or Colin Kaepernick? And about 20% of people were like, oh, that Kaepernick must have said that. And it's like, no, not at all. Thankfully, Twitter and bot farms weren't around in Jackie Robinson's day to blow that out of proportion. Point being, Willie O'Ree was of that generation of black athlete who was exposed to a lot of the backlash that came because, people like Jackie Robinson broke through and were successful and proved that, I think white society had been missing out on by having sports be segregated. He Willie, in his case, saw it firsthand when he went to a baseball tryout in the Deep South, not long after the lynching murder of Emmett Till, when, a lot of the practices of segregation were being doubled down upon as a response to, the U.S. federal courts, making decisions like Brown versus Board of Education. And recently, I think Rees used the expression of, it's one step forward, two steps back for diversity and inclusion sometimes. I think he said that earlier in the year when he was giving an interview while weighing in on the aforementioned Akeem Alou, who's a Nigerian-born Canadian-Ukrainian hockey player who about this time last year went public with, some of his tension with his coach Bill Peters when Alou was a first-year pro. When I saw Reese saying that, after reading this book, I sort of connected an incident from his career with the Bruins to the specific one in the Major Junior Ontario Hockey League that sort of soured me on covering that level of the sport. For O'Ree, it was a time in 1961. He stood up to the aggression from Chicago's Eric Nestorenko during an away game, and a bench-clearing brawl ensued. And ultimately, Chicago team officials decided to lock Willie O'Ree in the Bruins dressing room for his own good. As Willie put it, I was a prisoner in Chicago Stadium. So he faced more severe consequences than Nestorenko, who was the instigator. Now, in 2018, a few weeks after some dude bros in, coincidentally, Chicago, chanted basketball at Devontae Smith-Pelly of the Washington Capitals, and a few weeks before Willie O'Ree got the call that he was going into the Hockey Hall of Fame as a builder, Giovanni Smith was playing in an Ontario Hockey League semifinal series with the Kitchener Rangers, and Smith, who made his NHL debut last season with the Detroit Red Wings, was suspended for the deciding game of this intense series because he gave the finger to the players on the opposing bench, held up his middle finger at the end of the game. It's definitely agreed upon in the set of facts that Smith, who is black, had heard racist taunting early in the season, and that goes back to what Willie said. You can't just be a hockey player. And it was a conference final that went 7 games, and chirping is a cherished part of hockey, but sometimes it goes too far. And doubtlessly there were lots of things said that crossed the line. And Smith, after he flipped the bird at the other team's bench, he got racist abuse and threats over social media. The OHL said it had to provide the Rangers team and Smith a police escort, something that never had to go there before, to the decisive game he was not able to play in. Now, I'm not here to defend giving people the finger, obviously, but it seemed just so unfair and ironic that the only thing that they had a mechanism to punish was Giovanni Smith, acting out, and not everything else that it had gone on during the series. He was the only one to face real consequences over all that ugliness, and for that and for various other reasons, I was just like, I don't think I'm going to write about this level of hockey anymore. I still love it, but I'm just going to withdraw. It wasn't, And now I think there was a similar double standard at play during, one of the bleakest chapters in that league's history, the OHL's. I'll tweet the link out when we put out our annotations of this episode, Neil, but my friends Darius Dominguez and Brian Thompson, they made a video not too long ago called OHL Desire that sort of shows the history of the league, the great people who've graced it and the teams, and it includes all the unflattering parts in between footage where they show clips that remind you about when teams left a city. There's a few seconds of the infamous fight between Akeem Alou and Steve Downey during Windsor Spitfires practice in 2005. We're talking about practice. Now, refresher, Steve Downey was a third-year player, which makes someone a veteran in junior hockey, and Alou was a rookie who had refused to submit to being hazed. So Downey cross-checked Alou in the mouth at practice and knocked out several of his teeth. So Alou, minutes later, came back to the ice, and they fought. Now, who faced a greater fallout over this? Alou ended up missing 2 months of hockey in his first year of junior, like, crucial development time, because the league rule said you can only trade a rookie at a certain point in the season, and it was early in the year. And that incident kind of followed him around, went on his, unwritten permanent record, as it were, and his NHL draft stock dropped. And as he's detailed, there were other times there were, misunderstandings, microaggressions that throughout his career. Now, no one's saying Steve Downey was on easy street, but within weeks of abusing and arguably assaulting his own teammate, again, at practice, possibly because he, felt threatened by Alou's, racial and ethnic background, Downey was wearing a maple leaf on his chest representing Team Canada at the World Junior Hockey Championship. And I don't remember the serious hockey knowers having this discussion over whether it was morally right to have him on the team after what would happen. That discussion never really got past, will Downey, rein it in and, be on the right, stay on the good side of the line. No, okay, ending tangent about the World Juniors 15 years ago. O'Ree now obviously faced racist provocations, but the book makes it very clear that he's not defined by that. It's other people who chose to define themselves that way by, trying to label him, trying to, bring him down. As he says, I have always tried to find my solution. And I think that applies to his second hockey career with the NHL diversity program. Like, he was the right guy at the right place at the right time when they wanted to, expand the game. And I think it should make clear that, what he talks about, what they talk about in this book, that the reasons you sometimes hear for why, the demographics of hockey are what they are, a lot of times it is just excuses. I mean, yeah, the game's expensive, but I think it's expensive for everybody, right? As we talked about in our Sean Fitzgerald episode last year, Neil. If a great game can't not be so good that it can shut out any portion of the population for reasons other than talent and desire. Because if that is the case, then how good of a game is it really? And overall, the notion, tried to find my solution, that's, I think, a great motto, in general in this sort of year of the pandemic. These aren't the best of times, but, Willie O'Ree, who maybe should have had more of a run in the NHL, he's definitely found a way to have the best of times in, difficult circumstances, at a time when, players had to negotiate their own contracts, when he was the, only black player in the league. He was obviously someone, you get the message that this is someone who believed in himself and practiced self-compassion as much as he, I think, practiced his skating and puck handling. So he has got our gratitude for joining us today, Neil.
Thank you, Nate. And after the break, Mr. Willie O'Ree joins us from his home in San Diego. First of all, I got to say, happy belated birthday. You just turned 85 on the 15th, I believe. So congratulations on that milestone.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you kindly.
I have to say, I know about the history you made. I mean, you can't watch hockey and not know about the history you made, but I had no idea the breadth of your history, your personal history, your family history. So I want to ask you...
Oh, yeah.
I want to ask you, who is Paris O'Ree?
About Paris? Well, I didn't know that much about my ancestry until I came to the NHL in '96 and got involved with Brian McBride. And Brian wanted to do a documentary on me, and we had discussed it, and he got together with a young lady that did the filming, Laurence Mayer, and they asked me about my ancestry and my grandparents and great-grandparents, and I knew little of them because my parents had never spoken much about them, but they decided that they needed to get more information if they were going to do this documentary. So we went down to South Carolina and went to the archives, and they had books there, and they pulled them out and went back to around the 1780. And that's how I first started to find out about my ancestors.
Yeah, it's remarkable, the story of how Paris ended up coming into New Brunswick from South Carolina on what might have been the early formations of the Underground Railroad.
Yes, that's true.
I want to ask you about working with Michael McKinley, who did this book with you. I had understood that you had done some work with him before on possibly a children's book. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was a children's book called the documentary of Willie O'Ree. And yeah, Mike's a fine dude. We had a good time doing the children's book, and then when we decided to do the adult book, we spent numerous hours on the phone. I got together and got photos and pictures and some information for him to do this book, and apparently it worked out good. They were very, very pleased with the outcome.
Yeah, it was a very interesting read. He actually wrote Hockey: A People's History, and I imagine that he, especially when he was expounding on your history and the history of the game and the background, and especially the Deep South, he must have been, utilizing his skill set as a historian.
Oh yes, yeah. We had a good time. We had a few laughs as we were doing it, and he asked me, well, how deep do you want to go into your personal life? I said, I just want to tell about not only my hockey career, but after I had retired in 1979-80.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead, sir.
No, yeah, I was just acknowledging what you're saying. Yeah, no, that absolutely. Nate actually had a question now for you.
Yes. How does the overall message of the book fit in with sort of the activism we've seen from hockey players and other athletes so far here in 2020? With me, I used my unfortunate accident with my eye injury. Playing the goals that I had set for myself and the dreams that I had set for myself back when I was 14. The two were to hopefully play pro and then one day get into the National Hockey League. Well, my growing up, and I decided when I was 14 that I wanted to become a professional hockey player, and I knew what I had to do. I was attending school, so I knew I had to stay in school and get an education. And then I had the privilege of playing with my brother on 2 or 3 teams before I left to go up to Quebec in 1954. And once my brother found out, the deep desire I had to play, he told me about a lot of things that I would need to know if I was going to pursue, hockey as a career. And he said you'll probably be faced with racism and prejudice, but he says I know the type of individual that you are, that you could just overcome that and kind of block it out, because if you decide you want to just concentrate, then that's basically what you'll have to do. And there's going to be a lot of hard work that you're going to have to do, because being the only black player at camp, I knew that I would have to work a lot harder than some of the white players there. And indeed, so at that stage in life, you sort of had a mindset of what people say to me or try to do to me, that doesn't define who I am. That's them defining themselves.
Not a bit. I knew what I wanted to do, and I just said if people can't accept me for the individual that I am, and then that's going to be their problem, not mine.
I have a question now. And when Jackie Robinson broke the MLB color barrier in 1947, there was a build-up in the media toward it. But when you write about your experience, your first game in January of 1958, it was much different. You write, history, of course, would make much more of it than we did that night. So why do you think why do you think that was? What factors are behind that?
I really don't know. When I had gone to the Bruins training camp on 2 occasions in 1957, and then I went again in 1958, and the Bruins had a working agreement with the Quebec Aces, the pro team that was playing out of Quebec City. Mm. So when I arrived in Montreal, and I was met by Milt Schmidt, the coach, and Lynn Patrick, the GM. They sat me down and said, "Well, we brought you up because we think you can add a little something to the team." He says, "Don't worry about anything. You're a Bruin, and just go out and just play hockey." And basically, that's what I did. See, I was no stranger to the Montreal fans because I had played against the Montreal Junior Canadiens in the Montreal Forum. And then they had a pro team there, the Montreal Royals, which I also played against after I played out of junior. So when I stepped on the ice, I think there was no big deal. They just said, "Oh, there's a black kid up with the Bruins." There wasn't really a big deal made about it. There was hardly anything written in the paper. And then I didn't realize that I had broke the color barrier until I read it in the paper the next day.
And you met Jackie Robinson twice, possibly more, but there's 2 times that you write about it in this book. So would you share those instances right now? The one when you were 13 years old, and then again in 1962.
Yeah, well, actually, I was 14, and I was playing baseball in my hometown, and I played shortstop and second base, and we won the championship that year. And the reward was that our team was going to be taken to New York to see the Empire State Building and Radio Music City Hall and Coney Island and the Statue of Liberty. And went and saw Mr. Robinson play. After the game, I went down to the dugout, shook hands with him, and told Mr. Robinson that I not only played baseball, but I played hockey. And he didn't realize that there were any black kids playing hockey at that time. And I said, "Yes, Mr. Robinson, there's a few." So we talked, and then I told him that I was gearing up to hopefully play professional hockey, and he just said, whatever sport you choose, he said, work hard and be the best player you could be. So, we left, and I go back to Fredericton, and I played baseball in the next year, and I leave my hometown in 19. I left in to go up in 1954 to go up to Quebec to play my first year junior, and then I went to Kitchener, Ontario, and played my second year junior, and turned pro in 1956 with the Quebec Aces. Punch Emlak was the coach. Well, after that, I had played with the Bruins. And I left the Bruins in 1961, went back to my hometown, and the Bruins said, "Yeah, Willie, go home, have a good summer. Look forward to coming back with the Bruins." So I go home and tell my parents and tell my closest friends I'm coming back with the Bruins. I was home about 6 weeks, and I get there. I'm living at my mom and dad's place with my sister. The phone rings, and my mom answers the phone and says, "Willie, it's a sports writer." So I take the phone, and I says, "Hello." He said, "Mr. O'Ree?" I says, "Yes." He says, "What do you think about the trade?" And I said, "Well, you have me at a disadvantage. What trade are you referring to?" He says, "Well, you've been traded to the Montreal Canadiens." I said, "I have?" He says, "Yes." He said, "How do you feel about playing with the Montreal Canadiens?" And I said, I'll probably be playing in their farm system. I won't be playing for the Montreal Canadiens." I didn't get any notification from the Bruins, no phone call, no telegram, nothing. I did get a nice letter from the Montreal Canadiens saying that they acquired my contract. So I go and I play started playing Hull, Ottawa, and I'm having a good year. And then I get traded to the Los Angeles Blades, a team operating out of Los Angeles in the Western Hockey League. So I go out there, and that's 1961. In 1962, I'm having a good year, and I get a letter from the NAACP informing me that they're having a luncheon for Mr. Robinson at one of the local hotels in North Hollywood, and I received an invitation. So the coach and 3 players go to the luncheon, and Mr. Robinson is standing over in the corner talking to some media people, and we're standing just offside, just waiting for Mr. Robinson to finish. When he finished, the coach and 3 players come over, and the coach introduced us, and he said, Mr. Robinson, I'd like to introduce you to 3 of the local players here, especially Willie O'Ree, newly acquired from the Montreal Canadiens back in the eastern part of Canada. And Mr. Robinson turned to me and looked at me and says, Willie O'Ree, he says, aren't you the young fella I met in Brooklyn? And I said, yes, Mr. Robinson. So he remembered me from meeting me in 1949 and then meeting me again in 1962, and it made a big impact on me.
Wow. Mr. O'Ree, speaking of baseball, you excelled in baseball too, and you earned a tryout with the Milwaukee Braves in Georgia in Waycross. How did you prepare to go from your situation in Fredericton into the Jim Crow South? What did you even know about preparing for that? How could you prepare yourself for that?
Well, I knew the way blacks were treated in the South. Excuse me. So I explained to my mom and dad, I said, I have this opportunity to go down and try out for the Milwaukee Braves minor league operations in Waycross, Georgia. And they says, oh, no, Willie, no, please don't consider that. They said, we wouldn't want you to go down there. We were afraid that there'd be bodily injury to you. So I says, okay. So then I talked to my older brother, and my brother was not only my brother and my friend, but he was my mentor. And he taught me a lot of things that I would need to know about sports, what I wanted to choose. And he says, well, you have this opportunity. How do you feel inside? Do you feel that you'd like to go down for the experience, or do you feel just pass? I said, gee, I'd really like to go down for the experience. He said, well, if you feel that way, he said, then go. Well, my parents were deathly against it. So I go down, I fly into Atlanta, never been in the South before, fly into Atlanta, Georgia. I got off the plane, walked into the terminal, and the first thing I saw was the restrooms were colored only and white only. So I went into the colored restroom. And then I come out and I contacted a black cab driver who was out in front of the terminal. And I explained my situation, that I had to stay in Atlanta overnight. Could they recommend a hotel? So he takes me to an all black neighborhood, a nice little hotel. I stayed there. The next day, I'm on the bus and I go into Waycross. I'm assigned a dorm with 7 or 8 other players of color. There wasn't any white players in the dorm, just black or players of color. I was assigned a dorm. The next day, I met the instructors, was issued a uniform, started back training. First week went by, and I'm still there. I could hear the racial slurs and the racial remarks from some of the other white players, but it didn't bother me. The second week, I'm still there and going on to play an exhibition game. And towards the end of the second week, there's a list on your dorm on the door, and if your name appears on this list, that means you're going to be sent home. So it was a Friday, and I see my name on the list. I go in, and they said, Mr. O'Ree, we're pleased with your performance, but we think you need a little more seasoning. So I was kind of discouraged outside, but inside I was thrilled about getting back home, getting back to Canada.
Right.
So I left, and back then, blacks had to ride on the back of the bus. So I get on the bus, and the bus starts rambling up to the northern states. And the only time I got off the bus was to go to the restroom and grab a sandwich or bite to eat, and back on the bus. And I was 5 days on the bus. And as I was getting closer up north, I started moving up on the bus, and I'm at the center of the bus. And when I got to Bangor, Maine, I'm sitting at the front of the bus. The next 3.5 hours, I'm in my hometown, and I stepped off the bus, and I said, Willie, forget about baseball. concentrate on hockey. And that's when Punch Emlak contacted me.
And I think you mentioned in the book, you had this tryout with the same organization that I think in 1952 signed an 18-year-old named Henry Louis Aaron. But there was a key difference between what his camp experience was like and yours. What was that?
I don't know. He probably
I think he said that. I think you said it was different. The living arrangements were a little different. I think.
Yeah, I was in a dorm, living in a dorm, and then we ate with they had our own eating place. But when I went down there, and I don't think my heart was in it fully, because I was interested in playing hockey, and I said, gosh, if I happen to sign, I would have turned the contract down, because I would have wanted to go back home. But it was a learning experience, and as I said, I was faced with some racial slurs and racial remarks, but it just didn't bother me.
And you utilized sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I said, and you utilized the Green Book. The Green Book is written about in the book where you to find a place to stay, correct?
Oh yes, and because I had to make a living, and the things back then, even when I went down there, they hadn't assigned a hotel for me. I had to find my own hotel. All they did was pay the airfare down, and then the bus fare back.
And now obviously your heart was in hockey, but when you're talking about your career, I think you wrote one point of the when the 6-team NHL era, it wasn't original and it certainly wasn't golden. What do you hope people understand about what those times were like for a hockey player, trying to make a living and trying to have some stability in his life?
Yeah, well, you needed to have some hockey sense. You needed to have some hockey ability, and I guess Punch Emlak saw something in me, because he watched me play the last couple of years, and even when I had my eye injury, and then I started back playing again. Everybody thought that I'd recovered from my injury. Even my parents thought that I could see. But I was blind in my right eye, and I only told my younger sister. And Punch didn't know that I was blind in my right eye, because I didn't take any eye exam when I went to training camp. They didn't have anything there to take an eye exam. I kept myself in good shape. I worked out at the gym, played baseball, and so when I went to training camp, I was maybe 2 or 3 pounds away from my playing weight. But when I went there with the purpose of making the team. They were going to keep 20 or 22 players on the roster. I told myself, I'm going to be one of the 22 regardless of what I have to do. If I have to skate faster or play harder, but I'm going to be one of the 22. And I was picked and made the team, and we won the championship that year, and then that gave me the extra confidence that I needed. I just told myself, well, you can do anything you set your mind to do. He says, all you need to do is just work hard and stay focused on what you want to do.
And now, what's something about your career when you get into the sort of nuts and bolts, hockey stuff? You were the top goal scorer in the Western Hockey League the first year you got to play right wing with your stick and your left eye toward the middle of the ice. Yeah. How much do you wonder sometimes about, what if that move had happened sooner? Because I think with the Bruins you were playing on the left side.
I know that's what I was thinking also. But see, I always played left wing, even when I was growing up. Even when I played in the younger leagues, I always played left wing. And then in 1965, when I went to training camp in Los Angeles, Alfie Pike was the coach, and I got there, and Alfie had about 6 or 7 left wingers, and he only had 2 right wingers. And he said, Willie, have you ever played right wing? And I said, no, I've always played left wing, being a left-hand shot. He says, I'd like you to give it a try. He says, I could use your speed on the right side. So I switch over to the right side now. The boards are to my right. I don't have to be turning my head to see the play because I can watch the play and the puck and everything. And it took me about maybe 6-7 games, and then I fitted right in. And then, as you mentioned, I won the goal scoring that year due to the fact that I switched over. And then I played right wing the rest of my career. I played 2 more years with the Blades, and then I went to San Diego in 1967. And in 1969, I won the goal scoring again due to the fact that I had switched over to the right side.
And nowadays, I mean, we see, watch hockey. I think the two best left wings probably the last 30 years have been Teemu Selanne and Alex Ovechkin. They're both right shots playing the left side. But back then, I guess it was fair. They were fairly like you're a lefty, play left wing, righty, play right wing. Is that accurate?
Well, yeah. Well, right wingers that play left wing and left-hand shots that play right wing, you have that advantage when you're coming down and then you're cutting in on the net. And I had lots of opportunities to score goals. I was considered a fast skater. I could get away quick. I could break away from my check, and once I got a stride away from them, I usually got in and got a shot on the net.
What was the level of play like when you got to Los Angeles after having played in the NHL, and then obviously when you're playing with Quebec with the Quebec Aces? What was it like? What was the caliber of play like in Los Angeles?
It was a good caliber of hockey. There was I played against several players that had played in the National Hockey League, and were playing in Seattle, playing in Vancouver. Victoria had a team. The Western Hockey League was a good league. There was probably 12 or 13 teams, and when I came in, San Diego and Los Angeles, and there was Phoenix, Denver, Salt Lake City, and then Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, Victoria. So it was a good league, and there was a lot of good hockey players playing in it at that time.
Yeah, so in LA, you also ended up. That's where you ended up making your home. You basically moved down to San Diego, and that's where the league found you after basically leaving.
Yes. I had played 6 years in Los Angeles, and then in 1967 was the first expansion of the NHL. That's when the Kings came into the Fabulous Four, and they weren't going to have 2 pro teams in Los Angeles. So the Los Angeles Blades team folded. But Max McNabb was the coach and general manager of the San Diego Gulls, and Bob Breitbart was the founder and the operator of the sports arena. And they found out that my contract was up for grabs, so they contacted me in Los Angeles and said, Willie, we're trying to get a hold of your contract. We will know in 2 or 3 days, and if we do, how would you feel about coming to San Diego and play? Well, I played against the San Diego Gulls the first year that they were in the league in 1966, and the sports arena would hold 14,380 fans, and every weekend that building was full. But back then the top ticket price was $6, $3. Senior citizens, military could get in for $2.50. So they filled that building on the weekend. So Max called me back and says, "Yeah, well, we have your contract. We'd like you to come down and negotiate." And I says, "Well, I'm working here. I could probably come down drive down after work on Friday." And they said, "Okay, why don't you come down and stay Saturday and Sunday, and then you can, if you want, you can go back on Sunday afternoon." I said, "Okay." So I come down, and I didn't have an agent back then, but I had a list of what I thought was a fair contract. And I asked for a contract, and I says, if we get into the playoffs, I would like $300. If we get into the second round, I would like $300. I'm using that just as a number. And I says, if I can score you 30 goals. If I don't get hurt, I can score you 30 goals. And if I score 30 goals, I want so much. So I had, listed down, and I went down and I carried it down. And I met them at the Mission Valley Inn. It's no longer there. Bob Breitbart was there. Max was there, and we meet. I come down and we meet in a booth, and we're sitting. There's the three of us. And they said, Willie, how have you been? I said, fine. He said, you had a good year? And I said, fine. So we talked. And then I says, I've got some things written down here, and I want you to take a look at them and think and give them some thought. And so they looked at them and and said, oh no, we can't give you 300. We can maybe give you 200 and this and that. And, crossed out and put this down and crossed out. And I looked at it and I said, well, I'm not happy. I said, I don't think this is a lot for a contract and for some bonuses. So I went back to Los Angeles. Drove back to Los Angeles. I stayed the weekend, or stayed till Saturday. I drove back early Saturday. Got back and started my job again Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then they called me Friday, and they said, Willie, we've talked it over and we've put some new figures down, and I think that we can probably come close to what you want. And I said, well, coming close is not good with me. I says, I feel that the amount of money that I had down is a fair contract, and I says, I know what my scoring title is, and I says, I know how many goals I can score for you, and I feel this is fair. So I went down. This is my second trip down. And again, they talked it over, and they said, we just want you to sign a 1-year contract, and so on and so forth. And again, we didn't come to terms. So I go back. I drive back. It's only 2 hours back there, and I drive back, and I'm working at my job. And then they called me again on the following Friday. And the same thing. I says, there's no sense of me driving down there and wasting your time and wasting my time. I says, I have a fair contract here, and then I added a couple other things, and because I had talked to some hockey players, and I talked to a couple of businessmen, and they said, this is not a lot of money for what you're asking, and so on and so forth. So I went down and I signed a 1-year contract. And I scored 25, 28 goals the first year, and then I signed a 2-year contract. And I was there for 7 years. They were in the league for 7 years, and I was the oldest player, staying 7 years. Some guys came and stayed 2 years, 3, 4, 5, 6, but I stayed the 7 years, and then the league folded in 1974. But I felt that I enjoyed San Diego. I met a lot of good friends down here, and I decided to stay, and I've been here ever since 1967.
Enjoying the good weather.
Yeah, well, it is good weather. I mean, if I was even considering on taking a cut in salary just to stay here, because the weather's great. It really is. But and then I kind of fell in love with a lot of friends and people that I met, and I just enjoyed it, and I got married here in 1969. Married a young lady from that's from Vancouver, and we have a daughter, and I'm here. And then I retired in 1979-80, and I wanted to get back into hockey because I felt that I had something to give back to the sport and give back to the game what hockey had given me, and I was very much interested in youth development. Hockey schools and hockey clinics for kids, and a door would open, a door would close, a door would open, a door would close. So I started. I had a few jobs. I worked construction for 3 years, and then I sold cars at John Hine Pontiac in Mission Valley. Then I got into the private security business. A buddy of mine that I was working with, Mike Gore. His dad, Bill Gore, was the mayor of Fredericton back a few years, and he had a security company. And Mike said he was going to go and work for his dad. He said, Willie, he says, come on. He says, you can make more money than working here with John Hine Pontiac. I said, I don't know anything about security. So I worked, and Mike left, and 2 months later he calls me, and he says, Willie, he says, I've got a job for you. He says, what you need to do is you need to write an exam through the state of California, which will allow you to acquire a guard card, which will allow you to work as a security guard. So I said, well, I don't know. I said, I'm pretty set here at John Hine. He says, yeah, but he says, this is a good opportunity for you. So anyway, I left and went with Mike and got a guard card, and I started working graveyard shifts. And my job was to have a company vehicle and to drive around to different locations where guards were posted. Like, we did a lot of construction areas, and I wanted to make sure that the guards were dressed properly, they weren't asleep, things like that. So I did that, and I worked the graveyard for about 4 months, and I moved down to the swing shift from 4 to 12, and then down to the day shift, and worked the day shift and did some functions with Mike, and I enjoyed it. Was making more money, and then they were getting into the armed guard business, where armed guards would escort jewelers to the airport so they could go and do a jewelry show, and then we'd come and pick them up and bring them back to their home or bring them back to their place of business. So I got into that, and then they wanted me to get my concealed weapons permit because they were having some businesses where they needed plainclothes guards, and so I had to go down to the sheriff's department and qualify with a weapon, and I qualified. Now I can wear a sport shirt, a sport jacket and pants, or a suit, and I can carry a weapon concealed. And that meant more money, and so I did that. And then I worked there for about 14 years, and then they were having a cutback, and they said we have to cut back. We have to cut your salary. So I said no. I said I'll just go take unemployment and then find another job. So I left there, and a buddy of mine was the assistant manager of the Hotel Dell. It's a hotel over in Coronado Island, very, very prestigious hotel. So I went over and I called Jim Teagarden was his name. I said, Jim, are you doing any hiring? And he says, no, but come on over and fill out an application, and we'll see what we can do. So I filled out an application, and within a month, he says, I got a job for you. But it was working graveyard, then the swing, and then the day, which I did with security. So I worked there, and I was there for 5 years. And then Brian McBride was the newly appointed vice president of the NHL's a diversity program. And he was just assigned this job by Commissioner Bettman. And he was in a meeting with Lou Vero from USA Hockey and 4 other gentlemen, and they wanted to expand hockey for every boy and girl possible, to give them a chance to play hockey. And Lou Vero was talking to them, and Jackie Robinson's name happened to come up during the meeting. And they said Ray Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947, and it opened it up for not only the black hockey players, but players of color. And then out of the blue, Lou Vero says, well, we have our own Jackie Robinson in hockey. And the room went silent. And they said, well, who is it? Lou Vero said, well, Willie O'Ree. He says, I was living in New York, and I watched him play with the Boston Bruins in the old Madison Square Garden. And he's quite a hockey player. So then Brian McBride said, well, do you know where he is? And Lou said, well, no, but he was playing in San Diego with the San Diego Gulls. So Brian tried to get a hold of me, and he had no luck. But he knew a couple of FBI agents in San Diego, and he called them. And he said, explained the situation. He says, I know Mr. O'Ree is in San Diego. And he says, I'd like to get a hold of him. So within a half a day, they called back and they said, yeah, Mr. O'Ree is working over at the Hotel Del in the security department. So then Brian called me. And when he first said, I'm Brian McBride, and I work for the National Hockey League in the diversity program. And I was a little hesitant, on the phone. And I says, why are you calling me? He says, well, we've got this new program. And he says, I was wondering if you possibly would be interested in working for some kids, getting them into hockey. And I says, well, I'm working here with the Hotel Del. And he says, well, what we'd like to do is plan a weekend of hockey for these kids in Boston to represent your breaking the color barrier. So the programs that they had, they selected 3 or 4 kids from each program, flew them into Boston for a weekend of hockey. I flew in and had a great time with the kids and talked to them and signed some autographs and everything. And then I go back to San Diego. And the kids went back to their respective homes. And then a couple of weeks later, Brian called me again, and he says, I've got this program up in Bellingham, and they need a guest speaker for these kids. Apparently, the guest speaker that they had in mind couldn't come, and he said, could you go up there and speak with these kids? I said, well, I'm still working, Brian. So I got time off. It was a Saturday, and I didn't work Saturday, so I flew up Friday. I addressed these boys and girls, and there were some adults there. Addressed them. Then I go back home, and then Brian called me again. He says, "How tight are you in with the hotel?" I says, "Well, if I had to leave, I have to give them two weeks notice." He says, "Well, I'd like to hire you with the NHL with this diversity program." So I give him 2 weeks notice. Now I'm working for the NHL, and I told him, I said, "Well, I can't move to New York." I says, "I've got my family here." I said, "I've got to stay here in San Diego." He said, "Well, you can work out of your home." So I flew to New York, and he laid out this program, and it was something that I felt that I was interested in, and signed up. And then in 1998, the All-Star game was in Vancouver, yes. And it just happened to fall on my 40th anniversary of breaking the color barrier with the Bruins. So I was there, and Commissioner Bettman appointed me the director of the NHL's diversity program, which is now Hockey is for Everyone program.
Right.
And then I started traveling around.
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, and how did that? How did working in that program? I mean, this is going to sound cliche, but how did working in that program and helping children? How did that kind of keep you young?
Oh, it did. It really did. I was traveling about 15 days a month. I was on the road, and I was traveling, and I went to. I spoke at a lot of elementary, middle schools, junior high schools. I spoke at boys and girls clubs, YMYWCAs, juvenile detention facilities. So they had me listed out, and I was traveling around to let these boys and girls know that there is another sport that they can play. And I says, I just got involved with it a little bit ago, but it's a good program. And I says, if you come. And if you don't like it, you can walk away. It's not going to cost you anything. So I started doing clinics, and all of a sudden, people wanted me to come and do clinics and speak at schools. And I mean, I was really busy, and I just fell in love with it. I can't say that I had a bad day. If I was flying and my skates didn't get there, then they managed to get another pair of skates for me to wear. And it was just being there and being on the ice with the kids, and naturally they wanted to know about my career and my history, and I told them about growing up and my eye injury, and I told myself that I overcame it. Once the doctor told me I couldn't play, I said I didn't believe him because he didn't know how I felt, and then I just told him about I wanted to give back to the sport what hockey had given me over the 21 years that I had to play, and it's been great. I thank Gary. Now I call him Gary, but before I used to call him Commissioner Bettman. And when I met him in Ottawa, the last trip, he took me aside and he says, "Willie," he says, "you've known me for over 20 years," and he says, "No more of this Commissioner Bettman. It's Gary. Please call me Gary." And I get a laugh out of it now because sometimes I have to hesitate, when I get introduced to him, because all of a sudden, I almost say, Commissioner Bettman. But he's been great. He says, if you have a problem and you can't get it solved, you come to my office. He says, my door is always open. And he was true to that. I've never had to go, but he's been very fair, and
right.
He's been a Joe when it comes to the program.
Nice.
He knew when he hired Brian McBride that things were going to change for the better, and it has. We have more boys and girls playing hockey now than ever before. More girls playing hockey, and it's just great.
And now you've talked, San Diego is your home, but you're from Fredericton. How would you describe the way that your hometown, people such as Bill Hunt wrote a column, and then friends such as Brendan David Sampson started doing some legwork. What can you just say about the way they rallied to the cause to nominate you for the Hockey Hall of Fame? And ultimately,
first, they thought I was in the Hall of Fame. They couldn't understand that I wasn't. Well, why isn't Willie O'Ree in the Hall of Fame? And I knew I wasn't going in as a hockey player because I only played 45 games in the National Hockey League. But Bill Hunt called me this morning. I was out having coffee with some friends of mine, and we were our social distance. I was wearing masks, so on and so forth. And he called me and I said, "Oh, Bill, I'm in a meeting right now." I said, Can I call you back a little later on? He said, well, how about tomorrow? I said, okay, I'll call you tomorrow. You call me tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. San Diego time. So I'm going to talk with him tomorrow. But anyway, getting back, yes, Brenda and David Sampson, they were jewels, really. They took it upon themselves, along with Bill, to reach out and contact so many people in the Fredericton area. And they got so many petitions, and they submitted it. And I mentioned them in my speech when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame. They went out on a limb, and I was so happy, and I congratulated them for all the tremendous work that they did, and they were so proud when they found out that I was getting inducted. I called them, from my home in San Diego when I got the call from Lanny McDonald and I said and John Davison. They called me on the day and said, "Yeah, Willie, you're going into the Hall." So Brenda was having a group of people at her home, and she said, "Willie, please call me to let me know what's happened." And I was supposed to get the call between noon and 3 p.m. And after I called them, and the phone rang, and I said, "Yeah, is Brenda there?" And somebody else had picked up the phone. They said, "Oh, Brenda, it's Willie O'Ree." So she comes and takes the phone, and Willie, how are you? I said, "Oh, I'm not too bad." She says, "Well, what's happening?" I said, "Well, I guess they are going to let me in the Hall of Fame. I put it like that, Oh, she went and she jumped up, and you could hear everybody in the room,
Right.
And it was great. It was just a great feeling.
I have to ask you in our last question. Thank you for giving us so much time. My last question is really when you were up there and in your speech, you put the speech at the tail end of this book, and you talk in the speech about, for example, looking up to Herb Carnegie and his brother.
Yes. Here.
And so I want to ask you, when you're up there, did you really feel like you were, representing a guy like Herb, who probably should have been in the NHL, and as well Larry Kwong, another guy who probably didn't get a fair shake? And you mentioned 7 players, I think you said, that probably could have made the NHL but didn't because they were black in the book. So did you feel like you were up there for them?
I was. I really. Herb Carnegie should have been in. He should have been in the Hall of Fame. He went to the Rangers training camp, and he was one of the best players there. He went to the Leafs training camp. He was one of the best players there. And he was overlooked. And when they called me, and they wanted me. The Bruins called me and said, "Yeah, we need you to meet the Bruins to play 2 games." I was overwhelmed, and I thought about these other players, Mike Morrison coming up after me 14 years later. But some of the guys that were named, and I felt that I was giving them justice by naming them, and I even talk when I go to schools and talk about breaking the color barrier. But I said there was other players out there, other black players out there that had the skills and the talent and should have been in the National Hockey League before me. But it just worked out that I just happened to be there apparently at the right time.
And Larry Kwong too, right? I mean, he was
yes.
so a Chinese Canadian who didn't get a fair shake.
Yes.
So on that note, Mr. O'Ree, I want to thank you for giving us so much of your time today. And
no problem.
Good luck with the book, and I imagine that you'll be doing some more promotions over the next few weeks. And we wish you all the best of luck with that.
I think I've got another list here. I think I got another 12 or 14, in November and December. So, I'll just take them one at a time and enjoy doing them.
Well, I can say that we certainly enjoyed talking to you, and certainly the story is, as we talked off the top, there's a lot to it, and there's a lot to your story. And again, thank you very much.
You're welcome. And you gentlemen take care. Be safe.
All right, thank you.
Well.
We'll do. Thanks.
We will.